So what are the pros and cons of texting over talking? Well, joining us to discuss that and many other things, no doubt, are Kelly MacDonald, who's UK Games Editor at IGN.com, and behaviour expert Judi James. Welcome both. I hope you've got your phones on silent for the purposes of this interview. Kelly, is it all good? What are the positives of texting over anything else?
Well, I think for me the main positive is that you're not monopolising someone's time for that, 10 minutes you've got them on the phone, or even that 2 minutes you've got them on the phone. You can send someone a text message and they can reply to you when they please and when they're not busy. Like, I always fear that I'm going to be interrupting somebody in the middle of something extremely important, whereas if you text and you give them that opportunity to just back off and respond when they want.
Judi, is it wholly a convenient thing, do you think?
I think it should just be a convenience thing. I mean, if you're too busy to do anything else, it's not a bad thing. But you're not forming what I would call a real relationship with somebody. I mean, face-to-face communication, you can see what your words are doing to the other person, whether they agree or not. You can see their body language. On the phone, you can hear, sometimes you speak to somebody on the phone, you say, "Are you okay?" They say yes, you go, "Oh, are you sure? You don't sound quite right." Whereas on a text, they could be dying, you'd never know.
You can also upset people with the text because you can't send a tone of voice, can you?
No, you can't. And then you do those really awful, you've got to admit this, the smiley faces. I mean, they are
I've never used
shocking.
I think that's a problem, I think, everywhere we communicate in text now. You offend people accidentally via email, you offend people with a tweet very often. You see these Twitter firestorms that happen.
How much of that is down to the fact that it's too instant? You don't have time to stop and think. If you wrote a letter, put it in your drawer and read it the next day, you'd probably think, "Oh no, I was a bit rude in that way to send it."
I think also it's the fact that you have to be a short, brief. You have a very few number of words or characters to get yourself across, so you can sometimes come across as really terse when really you were just being expedient.
How damaging might this be in the long term? Are we getting sort of too bogged down in the impact it's having on the way that we communicate in business, for example?
I mean, that is the point. It's well, not only is it creeping into business, I mean, did you see the Leveson when we're actually getting texts read out in court, including the LOL? I mean, you don't want that really, do you? But all this,
and it doesn't mean lots of love.
No, I didn't know that. I recoiled in horror. I had to go back through my own text and realise who was being rude to me. I think that's absolutely a problem. I mean, years ago, people in business would write a letter, they'd have a secretary that would actually probably say, "Do you mean this or do you want it more formally?" Now it's very instantaneous, and I don't think that's particularly a good idea. The first thought is not always the best thought.
Kelly, we were talking in the office though about the fact that texting in a way is a bit old hat. Instant messaging is the thing that a lot of young people are using, isn't it?
It's partly because it's free. Yeah. Like if you're even on Skype, you can send text messages, and if you're on Google Chat, you can sign into that on your phone. Same with instant messaging, same with Facebook messaging now. They've been very clever about integrating that into the Facebook app on phones, and that way you don't have to spend any money to send that message to your friend. Or I just have to say, if I'm talking to my mother, I will always call my mother. Like by voice, I will never text my mother.
Do you do it on Skype?
Nah, I do that with a phone. I
Skype
call my mother
really
on the phone.
Alarming, Skype, actually. It's when you just walk in and the thing's on and you haven't brushed your hair or something like that. I mean, you have to learn a whole new body language on Skype so that you're not just sitting there looking like a zombie, I think.
So there are lots of generational differences and preferences, aren't there?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at there. Like my mother, it's not that she can't use phones. She's perfectly technologically apt. She's just used to communicating by voice. So it would be sort of rude to text her rather than call her, from her point of view. I wouldn't be offended if somebody texted me rather than called, but I think there is a generational gap where sometimes if something's important, people feel you ought to call up.
And there also is that temptation, as much as it might be convenient for us to text somebody, if a lot of people feel that they have to respond immediately, and then it gets inside your head, doesn't it?
I mean, that is the pressure. It's the same with email. If you do allow a gap, people are expecting you to do it straight away. And I find that, you sit next to people sometimes and they're not talking to you and they're tapping. I said to somebody the other day, I'm really sorry, we've only met at a job right away. What are you Oh, I'm just telling people I'm sitting with you. And I thought, couldn't we talk? Couldn't we have an experience of conversation? Yeah. Exactly. Why is that going out? And why aren't you enjoying what you're doing? Looking and seeing and things like that.
I think people do often say, we talk a lot about how technology gets in the way of communication, but it's easy to forget that pretty much all popular technology is there to enable communication. So things like Facebook and Twitter, all this stuff is taken off because it's a way for you to communicate with other people, and it's all focused around people, not necessarily around shutting yourself off from the world. It is changing the way that we communicate.
I just feel there's a difference. It's a virtual communication, so that when you meet them, they're not the person that you've actually been talking to.
Do you text strangers often?
Well, if you're going, I mean, the point is when you put stuff on Facebook and things like that, there's little faces pop up, want to be your friend, and I'm thinking, well, I've never met you, and if I do meet you, you're probably, I don't know. you've built up quite a long communication with them, but when you see them, even people that I work with, they send you funny texts and they're incredibly miserable when you meet them or something.
It has to be, yeah, it's everything in moderation, isn't it? 'Cause it does make your head a bit of a mess. Do you ever switch it off? Ever say, I've had enough of this?
Yeah, I've started doing that recently. I've started just having several hours of a week where it just turns off completely and there's none of it, because it does get kind of addictive, doesn't it?
Oh, totally addictive.
This addictive like checking loop where you could spend basically your whole working day going between Facebook, Twitter, phone, email, back to the phone, Facebook, Twitter. It goes
several
in a loop.
hours. I have several days. I need to clear my head sometimes. Kelly MacDonald and Judi James, thank you very much. Good discussion. Thank you. Nice to see you.